Good morning, Darren, Lucy and Tash. My name is JP Van Mort. How are you?
Hi, well, thanks.
Looks like you're in a car, Darren.
Yes, I am. Yes, up in the snowy mountains. So reception's poor.
Hopefully it's not too cold.
No, it's not too bad. We've been blessed. Yeah.
And what are you up there for, Darren?
Recreation, fly fishing.
Oh, there's worse things to do.
Exactly.
So we're up to about 14 at the moment. So good morning, everybody. We'll just welcome to the third of 14 workshops around the native seed sector strategy for Australia. I think we're expecting about 20 to 30 people today. So we'll just let the people come in for and we'll just see how we go with people coming on board. We're up to about 16 at the moment. Today's, good morning, Martin, how are you? Kelly, Alistair, Peter, good to see you. So while we're waiting for people to come on board, as an icebreaker, today's workshop is about capacity in networks. So can you just, as an icebreaker, type into the chat line, because we'll be using the chat line a fair bit during the workshops, and you'll see that on, if you go to the bottom of your screen, a thing called chat. Is when you want to know something about native seeds, like how to do something or to go for a source of truth, where do you go? What's your source of information? And do you just go to Google, or do you have a specific organisation or person, or is it a set of guidelines that you go to? Where do you go to find the capacity that you need to do things better? Adele says Flora Bank, Australian Plant Society. Apparently you're popular, Martin. The WA Herbarium. Keep them coming. And good morning, Paul. Good to see you again. And Virginia's just joining now. Atlas of Living in Australia. We'll just give it another minute to let people come on board, and then we'll start. And Darren says he uses all of the above. And Andrew and Steve are back for another session. Okay, we've got 19 on board, so I think we start. Look, as I said, for those of you just joined, my name's JP Van Mort, and I'm from ACIL Allen, and I'm part of the Project Phoenix team. That is an initiative that's looking at a whole range of aspects about how to develop and grow the native seed sector. I'm specifically working with my colleagues, Laura Baker, who's online, and Alexandra Lobb and Rebecca Moriarty on developing the strategy. And the process we've been through so far is we've done a whole range of ranging interviews. We've written the discussion paper, which I hope you've all read before this workshop. And now we're doing a series of workshops on a state basis as well as on a thematic basis. And today's theme is capacity and networks. Just as an introduction, and also just to modify the content so that it's suitable for everybody to come today, can you please use the raise your hand button, or the thumbs up button, which you'll see in reactions in the bottom there, if you didn't attend one of the workshops yesterday? So three out of the 20 online didn't attend yesterday. So thank you for that. So based upon the fact that many people have attended yesterday's workshop, I'm going to change the order of the slides a little bit. The rationale behind this, I suppose, is essentially there are some common features to all of these workshops, and we'll cover those at the end. But today is very much about capacity building. So what I'm going to do is still set some scenes, do some scene setting, and this is for the people who weren't there yesterday to set the context. But then we'll get right into working through the issue of capacity building. So just, I'm going to share my slides with you for a second. Just talk to these slides, and then we'll go into a breakout session, and then we'll have a discussion around that. So so today is about capacity building, and I've just got to work out how to share my screen. There we go. Okay, capacity building and networks. That is today's topic, and we're going to spend probably the good first half of the discussion just working through this specific issue, and then after that we'll go through and look at the top and tail dimensions around the strategy itself. But to set the scene, and then after I've set the scene, we're going to go into some breakout rooms of about half a dozen, so there'll be about 3 groups, and we'll go to that. And I just want you to focus on a couple of questions as part of it. But what came through in the initial framing of the strategy is what we call a series of design pillars. And you can see on the screen, here are the 5: information provision, quality and standards, which we'll do a session on, smarter reg, capacity building and research and development. And yesterday we had a session on research and development. But what we're talking about now is capacity building, and there's 2 aspects to capacity building. One is about developing the skills and infrastructure, and the other one is about enabling and promoting the wider use of native seeds. So where are we now? So look, the range of capacity that we can build is quite broad. You know, it includes a whole range of different people and organisations in communities, including Indigenous. It's about knowledge, skills, education and infrastructure for non-profit, for-profit and government organisations. One of the things that many surveys have shown is that while individual capability is rising in some cases, overall it looks like capacity is declining in some areas, and organisations find it very hard to sustain and grow capacity. Part of the reason for this is that it's compounded by poor and unreliable funding. So also there's people report a bit of a demographic challenge, and really people are saying we're at risk of losing skills and losing knowledge, as well as just sustaining what we've got, let alone growing it. If you look through all the papers and the ideas and initiatives that are there are 3 key ideas that people say we'd like to achieve. Is first of all, we'd like to see some coordination across the native seed sector, and also some ability to scale up and down, because one of the things we do know is that the need for capacity seems to wax and wane a bit. So it's not a constant demand, and so there does need to be some flexibility in being able to run hard and slow down as we need. There is also a lot of the information and resources that are available are quite fragmented. Part of the reason for the fragmentation is that the industry is quite diverse. So bringing that together, making it digitally available through some sort of construct of a digital hub, and there's a lot of flexibility around that, is seen as very important. There's also a need to revitalise education training and knowledge transfer programs for a range of diverse audiences, because the interest there to develop skills and capacity is there, and there's a great opportunity to revitalise. So if you look at this issue about promotion and building skills, some of the things that we could do as part of a 10-year strategy for the sector is a coordinated plan and some promotion of the sector overall, improving funding security by securing additional income streams, providing clearer information on supply and demand, sharing resources. This is knowledge, but also potentially infrastructure such as various equipment. Seeing some strategic focus or improved strategic focus in government funding, and revitalising the skills development and education and training programs. So what I'd like to do now is for us to break into our rooms, and Laura's going to put these questions in the chat box so you'll be able to see them. And what I'd like you to do is basically break into your rooms, introduce each other. You'll be allocated to the rooms randomly, and then work through a couple of these questions. I suggest we've got about half an hour for this, so I suggest you get through as many as you want to. You can focus on one and unpack it completely, or you can have a go at all of them. It's totally up to you. It should be driven by the people who are there. Just as a guide to the process is we will be jumping in and out of some of these rooms to give you a hand, but also what I'd really suggest you do is make sure that everybody has a say and focus on the questions that are most important to the people that are in the group that you're in. So I might just stop sharing my screen and just ask you to put your thumbs up on that reaction button if you're clear about what we need to do. So is everybody clear? Are we all thumbs up? Or would you, if you're not, just speak up and I'll get some questions going. So you're okay, Alistair, Kelly and Tash and Kala? I think we all are. All right. So James, could you send us to our different groups, please? Okay, so let's pull, there's no hands going up, so let's just pull this together. Can you just take a minute or two and reflect and write it up in the chat line, please, what you think the key points are that you just raise the one or two or three key points that came up in the discussion from your perspective, and just tap them out into the chat line, please. It's not short, I agree, Joanne, but they're good comments. So affordability of courses, more than, broad range of issues to be covered. List of resources that are available from Riddell. Keep them coming, please. Knowing the economic impact of the industry, good point. Need education at several levels, including into policymakers. Identifying shared problems and solutions, moving beyond state boundaries. Okay, we'll just leave a minute for another couple of points, and then I'll get James to administer a poll. databases, and workshops for volunteers. And in the group that I was in, we're also discussing just about labour attraction as a constraint, full stop. All right, James, can you please administer the poll? And this is a poll on, in relation to capacity in building and networks, where the constraints lie. So from your organisation's perspective, or if you're sort of more in an advisory or rep role, where you see it generally lying as part of it. So James, could you administer the poll, please?
Yeah, absolutely, JP. So that's the one with the 5 options, and we're selecting top 3.
Correct, that's right.
So here it is.
So there's 21 online. So pick your top 3. $16 out of 21 completed. 18 out of 21, 19 out of 21. We're nearly there. Just give it a few more seconds. Still sitting on 19 out of 21. 20 of 21. Five more seconds. Great, thank you. I'll just share the poll with everybody. So look at the number 1 response from 85% of people was partners and networks. The second highest ones ranked were equal, were access to skilled staff and volunteers, knowledge and systems, and then we had equipment and maintaining motivation as the last 2. So I'll just shut this poll down. So what we're going to do now is we're going to repeat the small group discussion, but on the concept around the construct of networks. And while I do that, I'll also explain the architecture of the strategy itself, so you can just get a view of that for those of you who haven't seen it before. So I'll just share my screen again and go to the right. Right page, just bear with me. Okay. Okay, so essentially on the right-hand side here, we have the 5 key components that are part of the workshop agenda, but also the strategy. So at the top, we have a challenge, which is about what we're trying to achieve. Then we have the pillars. We've just been talking about capacity. Quality is one of the pillars, but it binds it all together, which is why it's separate. And then we have governance, about who owns it. And towards the end of today's workshop, we're just going to have a session around comms. What I want to do now is actually go to the governance section and just pull out one bit which really relates to networks. So essentially the strategy is going to be written out in what's called a mission structure. So you've got the mission objectives, which are a series of challenges, and we'll come to them later on. You have an oversight committee, which is who owns the strategy, and we'll come to that later. But also within that are essentially is the construct of what's called a knowledge sharing consortia. It's also called a community of practice. It's really about how people who are involved in Native Seeds can come together and share information. And this is all the way down to individual people who have similar sort of jobs, to organisations, both in the advisory and research space as the people who actually work inside of it from a volunteer or a commercial basis as part of that. So when you think about the knowledge sharing consortia, people only come to networks if they find value in a network. And so what you want is you want an open network structure and you want it to be flexible. And then some of the things that people look for from networks are listed down in the dot points that are here. And I will get Laura to copy these 4 dot points into the chat group in the same way that we did last time. So the first really is what people come to networks is activities that integrate learnings and develop new insights for them. So the other one is that there can be fora for sharing, for shared ideation and gap analysis. So in other words, what aren't we doing, and what could we do? What could we do that is new? It also allows for multiple uses of data and people to form partnerships around shared delivery and impact. So if we're all trying to achieve the same thing, or we can operate off the same platform, we might share the way we do things together as part of that. So those are some of the ideas around knowledge sharing consortia. So what I'd like you to go and do is go back into your groups and have a think about networks. And the key question here is really, which networks are you, what networks are missing? What networks need to be created? And specifically, what networks need to be created that are going to be of value to you individually? So somebody raised a point overall, saying, there are some national structures that need to emerge, and that's fine. But what we're really interested about saying is, what networks do you have, and what networks would you like to create? And we'll break back into our small groups, and we'll do this one for about a shorter period of time, maybe 10 or let's say 15 minutes, and then we'll come back together and report that one out. So James, could you send us back to our groups, please? All right, welcome back everybody. I hope you had a constructive discussion. The debriefing on this one's the same as last time. Can you just go to the chat box and put in your just your key reflections or comments of what came out of your discussions, please? Need to connect suppliers with procurers. People should be paid to be part of the consortia, and they should be particularly to draw on the knowledgeable ones. What do we mean by the industry? Again, a database of suppliers and purchases, and suggestion to look at Evergreen Connect for an example of how it can be done. An Australian native seed marketplace, says Joanne Driver, and that's certainly going to be the discussion tomorrow in the Understanding Demand one, and also this afternoon in supply. Kirsty's looking for clarity on what role the consortia would play. Fiona's talking about the NESB hubs. And Lucy's given us a nice list of all of the networks that already exist. Great, that's been fantastic, thank you. Before we move on to the next agenda item, does anybody just want to make a comment before we move on? Martin, do you want to elaborate that you're feeling a bit Groundhoggy Day, that we're trying to repeat the past? Of course.
It was just a comment that came up between a couple of us that I have had a couple of calls with people I've spoken to in the wider network saying, we did this 25 years ago, and Darren had just mentioned the same thing. And I said, well, that is the difficulty, isn't it? We have, in a sense, been here, but the industry, as Darren had said, he's been out for a number of years, come back, and nothing has changed. And that's the dilemma that we're all working with.
And networks, like all networks, need to be replenished over time, and they need to change focus and form, and the people move on and those sort of things. And so they require maintenance.
And argumentative people like myself just leave.
Yeah, well, you're still here, Martin. Yeah, look, okay. There's a couple of bits I'd like to do now, which some of you may have participated in yesterday, but they're important for the overall design of the strategy. And so we're going to talk about the challenge, which is the top of the strategy, and we're keen to see how the challenge talks to you, and also a code of practice. Because this is a code of practice is integral to quality and a whole range of different things. So I'm just going to put up the challenge, so just to remind ourselves what it is. And I've jumped ahead to the slide deck rather than sharing my screen first. Okay, the challenge is really, there are two challenges, and these are the aspirational statements at the top of the strategy. We've drafted some initial ones, and we're keen to get your views around them. So challenge one is seed banks continue to make the full diversity of Australian native plant species and their genetics available for posterity and active use. And the key point here is that we have, we've captured all of our full diversity of Australian native plant species, and that they're available not only so we have them, but also that we can use them. The second challenge is the native seed sector attracts the resources to sustain its skills and capacity to respond when required. So this picks up the variability in demand. That is a key challenge for the system, but also, and this came out in some of the breakout rooms that I was in, which is also saying that it's got to be attractive. People have to see a livelihood in native seeds for it to flourish as a sector. So I'm going to break up the slides now, and Laura will put these two challenges in the chat box. But what we'd like you to do is to just go and vote on these and tell us on a scale of 5 as to whether they inspire you or not, which was the question in the discussion paper. So James, can you please administer the poll? And the poll is up now. We've got 4 out of 17.
JP, I was commenting in the chat room that administering the poll sounds like it should be painful.
What do you mean?
Well, you just said to James, now administer the poll like it's going to be an electric shock or something.
You're right, I should find some nicer language. Maybe I should say lead on Macduff or something, you know. We've got 13 out of 17, we're nearly there. $14 out of 17. And we're still on 14 out of 17. I'll just give it another 10 seconds. Looks like that's it. All right, I'll end the poll and share the results. Okay, so for question challenge 1, which is about the banks being held for posterity and of active use, the most common response was 4, then 5, then 3, and then 2. So that's a slightly lower score than we've had in the 2 previous workshops. And then if we look at the second one, which is about the capacity to respond as required over time, again, 5 is the highest this time, and we've got our first 1. So I'll stop the poll now. And I just want to hold a quick discussion around the challenge. My question to you is really, do you think that as writing the aspiration at the top of the strategy, is there anything missing? Steve looks like he's warming up to say something. I know he's just checking his computer. So, okay, let's move on to quality. I'll just share my screen again. Okay, quality. We're going to have a discussion around this as a plenary one, so we won't go back to our breakout groups. A few people have apologised, and we're down to enough people to have an open discussion as a whole. So, quality. So this is one of the design pillars. It's about best practice, and it's also about people knowing their attributes or the quality so that the seed they've got is suitable for what it needs to be used for. Quality is really important, and it binds everything together in any sector that develops because it is the underpinning glue. To do that, it requires a standard, and the standards need to be owned and used. Also, quality systems evolve. What we observe in all sectors and in all industries in time is it starts with people inside of the industry documenting what it needs to be done, and then over time, it can become part of the transaction. So we have the quality attached to the seed as it moves through the industry, and it's used as a basis for training and people demonstrating the quality of the way that they undertake their work. So therefore, it really has 2 dimensions to it. It has a mark, which is saying that the Heart-TIC Foundation is a simple one. To people say, okay, at a simple signal level, there is something that identifies that this is of quality. And then there is a code of practice which breaks it down to all of its different parts so that people can demonstrate that they've met that quality standard. And it also forms a part of training and education and a whole range of different things. The drivers for quality are essentially that people need to know that they've got viable seed, they've got the right seed for what they need to do, and that it's come from the right source. Barriers that are often cited is cost. If you have too many standards, it can be confusing and people don't know which standard to refer to. And of course, there's no use having a quality system if nobody uses it. So the discussion questions here, we've decided to structure this around a code of practice. Laura's going to put these questions into the chat box when I put the screen down. But the questions we'd like to discuss with you is, do you support the development of a national code of practice for the native seed and plant sector? Do you support a code of practice as an alternative to licensing and regulation? Do you think a code of practice should be voluntary or used as a form of compliance? And if it was to be introduced, do you think it creates more red tape for small business? So do we need it? Is it an alternative to regulation? Should it be voluntary? And does it create red tape? So I'm just going to stop there and put it open to you to start to responding to those questions. What do you think, Darren? That was a very thoughtful groom of your beard there.
What do I think? I think quality is the #1 priority moving forward in the industry. But how you measure that and how you police it and is the $1 million question. Whether it's best by code of practice, I think it has to be used. Otherwise, people will choose to ignore it. Yeah, look, I don't know the best way to go about it because we spoke about this in our breakup groups. The industry is at such a immature sort of position. It's very diverse as we've spoken about, and we've got to be really careful that we don't put up too many barriers too quickly, which might set the industry back. I think the important thing is that we're getting native seed out into the ground and it's growing and there's demand for it. I think we've got to have really high goals, but it's got to be a staged and very well thought out strategy to get to those goals, and those ultimate goals might take us 20 or 30 years to get to. So look, I agree with accreditation, code of practice. I agree with legislation, but I think it's got to be done really carefully to make sure that we don't put any speed humps. I think the most important thing at the moment is the industry keeps growing, but we've got to have a long-term high expectations of where we want the industry to be.
And from the part of Australia that you work in, Darren, is the industry growing?
We come at this from another angle where we've gone in unashamedly trying to create a commercial product for native grass seed particularly, and we think if we can achieve a commercial market, then we can also provide a really high quality and consistent and reliable supply to the revegetation program as well. So yes, our demand is growing incredibly strongly at the moment, which is very exciting. But it is Australia-wide. We sell seed right across the whole country, so it's not. Our production areas are in northeast Victoria.
Okay, great. So Darren raises a very good point, and it came up in yesterday's workshops as well, which was that high goals, quality and code of practice, good ideas, but staging so we don't, strangle or create unnecessary barriers is seen as a really critical risk to manage. So what's the first step? What's the most logical step that we could take to improve quality? What do people think?
Where's the lack of quality coming from? It's to me, I totally agree with Darren. I've been harping on this forever, but we need a code of conduct. But that code of conduct is not going to be a barrier to good players. The code of conduct will help the good ones up and weed out some of those that are less than that have bad motives, I suppose. But it's a bar that you have to jump to become an industry. I mean, I don't understand why we're even still talking about it.
Yeah, let's elaborate upon that, because you raised it in the breakout room, Steve. So you said yesterday you think that a code of practice is so why do you think we're still stuck on this, or some people are still stuck on this?
I don't want to go down the road of questioning people's motives and why, but the reason that it is a good idea and a sound business plan is that it gives you credibility. Like Darren said, it's all about quality, and at the moment it comes in all levels, from no quality to very high quality. I mean, we need to clean it up. We need to have a product that is consistent, that people rely on. Like you said, with the heart tick, you look at that, you don't even worry too much about what the product is. It's got the heart tick. It can't be bad for you.
Mm.
You know, it's not there for no reason.
Yeah. My point around a code of practice and quality and aiming, like, I mean, at the moment, you know, let's talk about seed viability. We haven't got the equipment available to us for, this is grass seed again, I'll just specialize in what I'm, to be able to produce a product that's 100% viable seed. It just, you know, the equipment's there, the investment's not there to be able to clean our seed down to 100% viable. So the next best thing is that we're honest and we tell people exactly how many viable seeds they're getting per kilo. And so that's a voluntary quality control that we've taken. And so that when people buy seed through us, they know exactly that they're getting their 150,000 viable seeds per kilo. It might be different to the seed count. There might be 300,000 seed counts there, but you're only really interested in the viable seed. So that's just a demonstration of working within our capabilities at this point, but still putting that quality mark on what we're trying to do.
I think that's the whole point of the code of practice, is to have labeling of seeds so people know what they're buying. So I think maybe people are don't quite understand what the code of practice might be designed to do, because I think actually what Steve and Darren are saying are exactly the same, because if you are selling a product and the person knows what they're getting, then that's what would be in the code of practice. It's not about selling seeds that are 100% filled, 100% viable, 100% germinable. It's about selling seeds of known quality. And if they're not known, then you label it. You just sell it and you say, I don't know what's in this. You buy it and, you don't know what's in it. So I think it's really to do with mandatory labeling, and it's not about having 100% filled, 100% viable, 100% germinable seed. That's not what a code of practice, I don't personally think, should be designed to do. I think it should be designed so that the purchaser knows what they're getting, but also knows that if there is missing information, they know that that information is unknown, and it's up to them to take that risk on whether they want to purchase it or not. And then if they purchase seed that's dead or empty, that's up to them, because it wasn't on the label. So that's their risk that they take. So I think this talk about whether on which code of practice, I think, is just people, we're not really on the same page of what the code of practice is designed to do. So maybe if everybody was on the same page about that, then we might all actually agree that, yeah, we need it.
The outcome of poor quality is poor reputation. And in the industrial markets, the native seed industry has a poor reputation. And we as a business are constantly looking for ways to build credibility. And I've talked to Darren about this. Australian Seeds Federation have a code of practice. We're a member of the Australian Seeds Federation. We use that to demonstrate credibility in the market. Nevertheless, there are still, because there is no accreditation, the barriers to entry are low. There are poor quality operators in the market still muddying the waters. So whether it's the ASF or someone needs to develop that, we call it what you want, code of practice, accreditation, needs to develop a system that we as industry participants can use to develop credibility.
So you raise a very good point, Cameron. So to take this discussion a bit further, I want to just put it up as a juxtaposition. So are we going to make better progress around improving quality by the suppliers getting themselves organised, or is it really about the demand, the people, the buyers as such, or the users of the seed, demanding that it has essentially some minimum requirements about labelling, for example, viability, what species it is and what its provenance is. Are we going to get more out of the demand or supply side response in this case?
Look, I was just going to say before that there's two sides to the coin. One is the demand side, and part of the education process that the Flora Bank program is working on, that Lucy's been working on, is that buyer education and setting specifications of the relevant information that the buyers require, so that that's quite clear to the suppliers. The other side of the coin is that code of practice, which is the sort of the underpinning supplier side. This is what we represent, and this is what we attempt to do. But I think both of those are represented in the FloraBank guidelines, setting some baseline code for the suppliers, but also educating the demand side on what are the key things that they need to know, want and understand in putting out orders or tenders or setting programs in place for seed suppliers, and both sides being realistic. But gradually over time, that will help establish a standard and hopefully lift a standard as you get as you develop all the systems. But again, all of these things are still dependent on having a tracking and monitoring system for your seed lots across the country and across regions. And that's something that I think needs to come. It is proposed, the sort of systems that are needed in the FloraBank guidelines, but I think without a uniform database system and tracking system and numbering system for seed, all the things we're talking about are still fairly academic.
So there's a number of evolutionary pathways that can come along. An idea that I'd like to test with you as a group is, what do you think of something a bit like almost, this is under the idea of a mark, of essentially having something like a star system. So, you know, in simple terms, a 1 would be that you know, there's no really quality signal behind it at all. 2, it's got parts of the attributes, and 3, you know the viability, the germinability, the provenance and the species and all of that. Do you think that would help people engage with this across the demand and the supply side?
I think putting
the industry is so diverse that how do you standardise that? I think it's up to the market. I mean, BHP have written a manual on what their quality standards are. Transport Main Roads Queensland have a manual on what their quality standards are, and we could go and develop something, but TMR is still going to have their own quality standards.
That's a very good point. So in other words, there's already quality standards emerging out of the market.
Yeah, and we as industry participants are responding to that, and by developing in our chat group, we talked about this, that we're investing in a platform to respond to that. That's up to us as a commercial player to invest in that ourselves. And I can see that just the people that are responding to these questions, this situation tends to come from more the commercial side of the industry rather than the conservation side of the industry. Because when someone pays good money for a kilo of seed, they want to know what they're getting. They want to know that it's going to come up. That's what this comes down to. So
and that's the diversity. Sorry, who was going to speak then? Was that you, Michelle?
Oh, no, Tash. I was just going to say that all of our seed, all of our seed that we sell onto mining company customers, be it Spinifex or Wattles or Gums, all comes seed tested, and they get a seed testing report with everything. So we can't sell anything to any of our customers without viability testing, seed counts. We also supply them GPS coordinates because we have to pick within a 100-kilometre radius zone of that mine site or that particular area that they are rehabbing. So we already do this. I find it really interesting.
Yeah, look, Tash, we're doing the same things. Lorena tests all of our seed. every batch, and it's done according to international seed testing protocols. There's a reality check about what's happening with that seed. I'm not interested in selling bruised fruit. There's no market for that, and
No.
I want the industry to be better than that. I have actually, because we test other people's seed as well, not just ourselves, but for other people. I've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars change hands on seed where no viability test has ever been done. And that same seed has turned out to be atrocious, to be put it. We have tested it at the end and found that the germinants were, 3 or 4% of the weight. So, this industry needs cleaning. It needs a set of rules, and it needs to get rid of a few people, maybe.
Just on that, there is already identified that disparity, though, between the quality required by the mining industry customers. That's not there at all yet in terms of conservation programs and projects or land care or NRM bodies, etc. There is no expectation. If they get something, they're happy, and often it's substituted species, all sorts of things. So that's still one of the biggest, the customer, ironically, the mining sector is driven by government demands, but it's the actual mines that have lifted the quality required. That's not happening in the conservation and or community wide sector, which is still it's a lot of money that's going through it.
Yeah, so there's quite clearly some different drivers, and there's an interesting point on the chat line as well from Kalea saying that the Mana Budjalan Aboriginal Corporation are also looking at developing some of these frameworks around traceability for food-based systems as well. So where there's commerce, which is particularly in mining and around food and those sort of things, these systems are starting to emerge. But it's in the conservation sector that we need to find a way to improve quality. That seems to me it can all fit under an idea of a code of practice or labelling or whatever, but ultimately the response might be different in the conservation sector because it's not there at the moment, it hasn't emerged. And so we can think about that and how to include that in the strategy. So that's been really useful. There's been good discussion there. Look, we'll just move on to the next agenda item unless people have any last closing points they'd like to make on this.
I think I'd like to say that as long as this code of practice comes out soon so that we all know what we're working towards, so a small farmer might be able to upscale according to those guidelines rather than it taking forever and people still operating in the dark for a long time.
That's a very good point, Joanne. So there are two agenda items left. One is communication going forward, and then finally my colleague Rebecca has been summarising the dot points that have come out of all the discussion. I'll just share with all of you at the end. So, but I'll now pass over to James and to put the context around James. So from the strategy itself point of view, at the end of these 14 workshops, we're going to write a draft strategy, take it back to Phoenix and the ESC, and then hold formulate it through, and then it'll go through a broader feedback across the whole of the sector process. The aim of the strategy is to have it done by the middle of the year, hopefully by the end of July. We're just finalising those details. But also the strategy is one part of Phoenix, which is 30 activities. And so James, who works for a communications group that's consulting to Phoenix, is just keen to get your views on how you'd like to, what information you'd like to receive and through what channels you'd like to get that information. So James, can I pass over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, JP. So I'll keep this segment short and sweet. So what I might do is share my screen. If I can just pull up slideshow. Just give this another crack. I think my laptop's having some funny issues as well. Get that open. Give this another go. There you go, that looks better. All right, so can everyone see my screen okay? Perfect. So yeah, as JP mentioned, we're really interested in getting an idea of how people want to be kept up to date regarding Project Phoenix in the short term, but also in the long term. Should these recommendations kind of be successful and be put forward and be implemented effectively? Who do we need to be dealing with? What do the messages need to be? How do you want to be kept up to date personally, and what opportunities exist really that we can look after for the project to make sure it's as successful as possible? So what I might do is ask everybody to have a look at these 3 questions on screen, and just in the chat box, pass on any answers that come to mind, any insights you have, just write them down and send them through to me. So I'll just walk you through that first question. So quite simple, how would you like to be kept up to date regarding the project? As it develops, there's been quite a bit of interest in a standalone Project Phoenix website. The other one that has been emerging is direct emails and a virtual newsletter with key updates and information. Feel free to put in the chat box if you agree with those, if there are any others we might have missed, but basically what would be the best way for you to be kept informed as we go forward. I'll just pause for a moment and let you put in any text there. Yeah, email, direct email. Okay, some interest in a YouTube channel. Yeah, direct email for targeted comms, yeah. Right, fantastic. So feel free to put some more thoughts in around that one, but we'll quickly jump over to the next question, which is, so in line with some of the opportunities, the challenges that we've discussed today around capacity and network building, who are the relevant people or the relevant stakeholder groups that we actually need to shift to make these aspirations happen? So a lot of the comments revolve around government. Is it state? Is it federal? If it is government, what departments, what agencies? Is it practitioners? Is it small business, big business? So in the chat box, just have a think and input there whose attitudes, whose behaviours actually need to be shifted to action some of the insights from today's session. Yeah, it's good insight there from Tanya. The benefits of social media is that shareability, especially for the general public. Yeah, gaining political capital. Yeah, good insight there from Lucy for seed purchases. We need to get them to forecast their seed requirements over 5 to 10 years. Excellent. Federal government with economic impact decision making. Great. All right. So this final question that I'd love your input in through the chat box is around the opportunities that exist. So in the long term, as we continue to build momentum, as we continue to action some of these recommendations, what are the real comms and engagement opportunities that you think we can take better advantage of? It might be, I've put some examples down there. So it could be publications, it could be events, it could be strategic partnerships that aren't currently being utilized. Are there kind of key opportunities you see from a comms and engagement point of view that could really help build this capacity and network goals that we're talking about today? And while people are putting that in, is there anyone that would like to provide a verbal opinion on that? Any of those 3 questions on the screen, are there any thoughts that immediately come to mind or opinions you'd like to get across? Gardening Australia, filming. I saw in one of the breakout rooms as well an opportunity regarding key influencers such as Costa on the ABC Gardening channel, things like that. They've got a large following and could be used to get out some of that broader messaging about the importance of the sector. Landcare newsletters, Indigenous Flora and Fauna Association. Excellent. Perfect. All right, so it seems like most people have got their ideas across there. What I might do now is pull up a short communications poll on the screen, just to give us a more specific idea of exactly how you'd like to be communicated with. So if you could just start completing this as we go forward. This will just give us an idea of how people look to be engaged with in the future, short term and long term. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll transition over to JP, and while you're filling out the poll, please feel free to carry on with the session. So back to you, JP. Thanks for that.
Great, thank you. So while you're filling out the poll, I will just share a summary of what some of the key points that have emerged from our discussions over the last hour and a bit. So, so basically the first discussion was around capability, and essentially these are the key issues that were raised out of the discussion from the chat line. So affordability of courses and memberships. There's some suggested education topics around collection, seed production areas and re-veg. Recognising that there are essentially segmentation around educating at different levels. So there's regional differences, commercial, volunteers for regulators, program managers, and different levels of accreditation. So there's a bit of diversity in the tapestry of how we structure capability. Fourth point is around broader promotion, so more engagement with government and MPs and possibly through an industry representative body. So putting aside the specifics about whether a rep body is right at the time, the industry needs to find a voice and a way to speak for itself. Promotion through social media and ABC, the better understanding of economic impact and employment opportunities. So in other words, under the jobs and growth dimensions, people can see that there's opportunities, there are livelihoods inside of native seeds, which is part of the development and ultimately the professionalisation of the sector. Engaging with each other on shared problems and solutions, and then the list of some of the organisations and sources were Flora Bank, Plant Society, Atlas of Living Australia, Google, Germplasm Guides, Australians, sorry, my screen's hiding from me, Seed Book, Botanic Seed Banks, colleagues, etc. So that was capability. Then with networks, so the idea of a network marketplace to connect suppliers with procurers, searchable by location. So some sort of repository, some sort of register about who's who and who's who. An observation, there are lots of networks, but not all of them are well known. So how can the networks be visible, be promoted? Then some of the functions of the network it might do. So about sharing information, data, connecting with others. Aligning with government or university programs and networks. If there was to be a formal knowledge sharing consortia that to bring in the required expertise of industry, positions should be paid. There should be a national industry body. Clarity on roles and activities in the industry itself and an industry body, and overcoming the challenge of defining the extent and coverage of the industry when creating an industry body. So again, understanding who the networks are, connecting people in the supply chain, sharing information, and in the industry working out how to represent itself. Code of practice. So some see this as a no-brainer, but others are more hesitant. And partly this is when the strategy needs to be clear about what a code of practice is and what it can and can't achieve. The challenge of standardisation in a diverse and complex market, whether there should be mandatory labelling regarding viability, germination, storage, provenance, location, etc. The fact that quality and code of practice need to be addressed from both the demand and supply side, and then looking at how we can get assurance of quality happening in some of the, well, assurance of quality is already happening in some transactions now, and how we get that to happen more broadly. So I'll stop sharing there. We're running a bit ahead of time. I raced through all of that naturally, but any sharing final reflections that people would like to make? And it looks like we might get away with an early mark today and say, or go home 5 minutes early. Looks like everybody's had enough. Last calls, going once, going twice, going thrice. All right, thank you very much. I'll just put up one final slide. So thank you. All the perspective we've had today will inform the strategy. If you've got any other thoughts around it, please email any reflections or thoughts to, we have an email address, nativeseed@ACL or Laura, who's the project manager. It's been very useful. There's been completely different things, some new things that have emerged out of today, but also reinforcing some of the points that came up in yesterday's workshops. We'll continue on with them and we'll let you know. And when the draft strategy comes up, we'll make sure you get a copy. So thanks for your time today and have a good afternoon.